What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, September 12th, 2017, getting into the week here. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. It is also Leonard Peltier's birthday. And if you do not know who Leonard Peltier is, you ought to, because he's the perfect example of somebody who has been steamrollered by the establishment for political ends here. And there's a wonderful documentary about Leonard Peltier's case called Incident at Oglala. Unfortunately, it's not available for free anywhere on the net, but you can watch it on YouTube for, I think it's 99 cents. It's also over on Netflix, so you might want to take a look at that. It's a very, very good documentary. So basically, recapping the case, Leonard Peltier is a Native American who is in prison. He's considered by Amnesty International, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the National Congress of American Indians, the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Center for Human Rights, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and Reverend Jesse Jackson, among others, to be a political prisoner of the United States. Now, Leonard Peltier was convicted for the deaths of 2 FBI agents who died during a 1975 shootout on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and he's been in prison for over 29 years. Now, there's actually a movie out called Thunderheart. It's been out for a few years. It stars Val Kilmer, and actually, it's my favorite Val Kilmer movie. And it's loosely based on what was going on and the amount of corruption that was going on the Pine Ridge Reservation. So basically, the Wounded Knee occupation of 1973 marked the beginning of a 3-year period of political violence on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. The tribal chairman hired vigilantes, self-titles as goons, the guardians of the Oglala Nations, to rid the reservation of the American Indian movement, which was basically more traditional and didn't want the reservation exploited commercially the way so many others already have been. So evidence indicated goon responsibility in the majority of crimes, but despite a large FBI presence, nothing was done to stop the violence. The FBI supplied the goons with intelligence on AIM members and looked the other way while the goons committed crimes. And one former goon member reported the FBI actually supplied him with armor-piercing ammunition. So, Leonard Peltier was a leader of the American Indian movement, and he was asked by the traditional people at Pine Ridge, South Dakota, to support and protect the traditional people being targeted for the violence. And Mr. Peltier and a small group of young AIM members set up camp on a ranch owned by the traditional Jumping Bull family. So on June 26, 1975, 2 FBI agents in unmarked cars followed a pickup truck onto the Jumping Bull Ranch. The families became alarmed and feared they were under attack. Again, it was an unmarked car. They didn't know who was in there. All they knew was the goons were running around the reservation shooting at people. So shots were fired and a shootout erupted, and more than 150 agents, goons, and law enforcement surrounded the ranch. When the shootout ended, 2 FBI agents and 1 Native American lay dead. The agents had been injured in the shootout and then were shot at close range. The Native American, Joseph Stuntz, was shot in the head by a sniper's bullet. Nobody ever investigated who fired the sniper's bullet. Nobody was ever charged in connection with his death. Now, according to FBI documents, more than 40 Native Americans participated in the gunfight, but only 3 AIM members, Bob Robideau, Darrell Butler, and Leonard Peltier, were brought to trial. Now, Mr. Robideau and Mr. Butler were arrested first, and they went to trial, and a federal jury in Iowa acquitted them on grounds of self-defense, finding that their participation in the shootout was justified given the climate of violence that existed on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and, of course, they could not be tied to the close-range shootings of the FBI agents. Now, Leonard Peltier had escaped to Canada, but he was arrested in Canada on February 6, 1976, along with Frank Blackhorse, And the United States gave the Canadian court affidavits signed by Myrtle Poorbear, who said she was Mr. Peltier's girlfriend and saw him shoot the agents. In fact, Ms. Poorbear had never met Mr. Peltier and was not present at the shootout. And soon afterwards, Ms. Poorbear recanted her statements and said the FBI threatened her and coerced her into signing the affidavits. We've seen that before at the Oklahoma City bombing, down there in Florida, the Boston Marathon bombing. This is what they do. The FBI are not the swell bunch of Joes portrayed on movies and TV. So Mr. Peltier was extradited to the United States. He was tried in 1977. The trial was held in North Dakota before United States District Judge Paul Benson, conservative judge appointed to the federal bench by Richard Nixon. Now, key witnesses like Myrtle Poorbear were not allowed to testify. And unlike the Robideau Butler trial in Iowa, evidence regarding the climate of violence on Pine Ridge was restricted. We're going to do a quick little shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're talking about Leonard Peltier and how he got sent to jail. And it's a big stinking cover-up, falsified evidence, falsified testimony. Today is his birthday, and that's why we're covering the story right now. So an FBI agent who had previously testified that the agents had followed a pickup truck onto the scene of the shootout changed his account, stating the agents had followed a red and white van onto the scene, a vehicle which Mr. Peltier occasionally drove. So they changed the testimony to implicate him. 3 teenage Native witnesses testified against Mr. Peltier. They all later admitted the FBI forced them to testify. Even with all that, not a single witness identified Leonard Peltier as the shooter of the FBI agents. Now, the U.S. attorney prosecuting the case claimed that the government had provided the defense with all FBI documents concerning the case. On the contrary, more than 140,000 pages had been withheld. That right there would be grounds for dismissal. Now, an FBI ballistics expert testified that a casing found near the agents' bodies matched the gun tied to Mr. Peltier. However, there had been a ballistic test proving that the casing did not come from that gun, and that was intentionally concealed and withheld from the defense. This was a railroading, plain and simple. Now, the jury, unaware of all of these contradictory facts, found Mr. Peltier guilty. Judge Benson sentenced Mr. Peltier to 2 consecutive life terms. Now, there was a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that brought a lot of this exculpatory evidence to light, and so Mr. Peltier sought a new trial. And the Eighth Circuit ruled there is a possibility that the jury would have acquitted Leonard Peltier had the records and data improperly withheld from the defense been available to him in order to better exploit and reinforce the inconsistencies, casting strong doubts on the government's case. Even though they admitted that, they still refused to have a new trial for Leonard Peltier. Because after all, you can't embarrass the U.S. judicial system. You can't embarrass the FBI by pointing out in court that they lied and fabricated evidence. Now, during the oral arguments, the government attorney conceded that the government does not know who shot those agents, and took the position that Leonard Peltier is equally guilty whether or not he shot the agents at point-blank range or participated in the shootout from a distance. Mr. Peltier's co-defendants participated in the shootout from a distance, but they were acquitted. Now, Judge Heaney, who authored the decision denying the new trial, has since voiced firm support for Leonard Peltier's release, stating that the FBI used improper tactics to convict Mr. Peltier. The FBI was equally responsible for the shootout, and that Mr. Peltier's release would promote healing with the Native Americans, and it certainly would. It's a sore point. Now, Leonard Peltier has served over 29 years in prison. He's overdue for parole. He has already received several human rights awards for his good deeds from behind bars, which include annual gift drives for the children of Pine Ridge, fundraisers for battered women's shelters, and donations of his paintings to Native American recovery programs. This is a good man. Now, Leonard Peltier, he's getting old, as we all are. He suffers from diabetes, high blood pressure, and a heart condition. So time to see justice enacted is very short. Although, how can there really be justice when you've taken 29 years of somebody's life away from them? And, of course, the FBI is out there saying there can't be a new trial. We know we're right. We're never wrong. The FBI never does any of these things. But we know the FBI does. Go back and look at the history of COINTELPRO in the 1960s. The FBI committed crime after crime after crime after crime, targeting Native Americans, the anti-Vietnam movement, the early women's movement, and, of course, the blacks with their Black Panther coloring book. Stunts like the hippie riot at Disneyland. This is what the FBI is really all about. They're not the swell bunch of Joes you see in those Hollywood movies and TV shows. In fact, when he was still director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover was just absolutely manic about making sure that Hollywood always portrayed the FBI in a positive light. You may have seen on Turner Classic Movies a film called The FBI Story, starring Jimmy Stewart. And what most people don't know is J. Edgar Hoover was actually on that set every day telling the director how to direct the movie to produce the image of the FBI that J. Edgar Hoover wanted out there. And he actually appears in the movie once from the backside only because he was afraid of being recognized as he went about his business. But that's the kind of control they have. And if you go to my COINTELPRO page, there's another little sub-article about how tightly the FBI monitors scripts in Hollywood. And if there's anything there that makes the FBI look bad, they'll go on in and they'll exert whatever pressure it takes to get the script changed or the project canceled. They're a modern Gestapo in our own midst. This isn't law enforcement. This is imposing the will of the rulers. The case cannot be made that Leonard Peltier had anything to do with the deaths of those FBI agents, but he became the sacrificial scapegoat so that the FBI could say, well, we found our man, and the case is solved, and the FBI always prevails, which was the entire rationale for the frame-up of Bruno Richard Hauptmann for the death of the Lindbergh baby. They had to put out the public image that the FBI was always going to get their man. Even if it's the wrong one. As long as they fry somebody, the media and the public will be happy. All right, let's get on to more current events here. Storm Irma is now up into the middle of the United States, causing a certain amount of misery up there. And down in Florida, they're finally beginning to pick up and clean up and try and figure out what's going on. Apparently, the Florida Keys took the brunt of Irma's fury. Certainly, there's a lot of flood damage going on up into Florida proper. But they're saying it's going to be weeks before all services are restored. Apparently, an aircraft carrier and other Navy ships have been deployed to the region to help with search and rescue operations in Florida. And Governor Rick Scott has done a flyover of much of the state and saying he just hoped everyone survived. It's a little optimistic. I think we're probably going to find that some people, especially the homeless, didn't make it through there. Kind of a nasty story coming on out here. There was a Pizza Hut manager in Florida at the Jacksonville branch who literally threatened to punish workers if they evacuated too early for Irma, and basically said the employees who needed to evacuate would get a 24-hour grace period before the storm. If they tried to leave before that, they did so at risk of their job. It's a little cold-hearted, I think. It's a little cold-hearted, especially when you take into account all the traffic jams and all the lines at the store buying supplies and everything. I don't think that really puts out a positive image for Pizza Hut. Not that I do pizzas much anymore, but there we are. Now, a little bit of good news coming from Hurricane Jose. The latest projected track shows it is now turned north, heading up into the North Atlantic. Now, apparently Jose just can't seem to make up its mind. It's sort of been bopping around all over there. Or the prediction models are screwy. And as a matter of fact, I saw an article the other day asking why the United States doesn't use the European storm prediction models, which seem to be considerably more accurate in their forecasting. But I guess it's a point of pride. We've got our own models, and they may not be very good, but they're ours, and we're going to use them. That kind of explains why that far end of the predictive track just sort of whips around back and forth like a snake on meth. The remnants of Hurricane Katia have scooted over here into the Pacific, and it is now forming a tropical depression, which is probably going to miss Hawaii by a wide margin, but we're not out of our hurricane season just yet either. Now, obviously, yesterday was the anniversary of 9/11. Everybody was out there with their various commemorations, and a lot of people were out there saying, you know, the story is really total nonsense. And article coming out of ZeroHedge.com. Krieger, we need to admit the government story about 9/11 is bovine excrement. That's not the phrase that he used. And says, unless we come to terms with 9/11 and the obvious fact that the official story is a ridiculous fairy tale, it'll be hard for our nation to move forward in an intelligent, courageous, and ethical manner. And he's absolutely right. All of these known documented lies, Saddam's nuclear weapons, Assad's sarin gas, 9/11 itself, are basically these festering wounds in the hide of the government. They're not going to go away, and everybody sees them. And the longer the government goes along trying to reinforce the official story, the more infuriating it gets for the average American who does not like being lied to, who does not like being treated like they're a moron. We are insulted by the reality of a government that lies to us shamelessly, bald-facedly. We're getting fed up with it. Better no government at all than a government that lies to us. More and more people are coming to that conclusion as well. Now, back on 9/11, when it happened, everybody was chipping in. And I think I mentioned the other day, when Claire and I were in New York for the 10th anniversary of 9/11, we noticed a change in the New Yorkers. I'd been to New York before. In fact, I'd even visited the World Trade Towers. I'd actually been in the building and down in that little gallery between them. And back then, the New Yorkers behaved just like the stereotype you see on TV. They're brusque, they're shouting at people, and very different on the 10th anniversary. And we talked to a taxi driver whose nephew had died in the World Trade Towers, and he said, 9/11 just brought us all together. And it's like I said, talking about Hurricane Harvey and Irma. Adversity does bring out the best in the American character, except for the looters and the scammers. So anyway, there was a unit called Team Romeo of police officers, and it was sort of an informal group because the Romeo stands for retired. And all these retired police officers put their uniforms back on and showed up to volunteer, helping to find people. And one of them, Lieutenant Anthony Tony Zioli, is coming out with a book called Rising from the Ashes, about how he and the surviving members of his unit and many of the other first responders are all suffering from cancers, post-traumatic stress disorder, lung diseases, sleep apnea, digestive diseases, and many have, of course, died, all as a result of inhaling the toxic cocktail of mercury, jet fuel, asbestos, and more. And remember, the head of the EPA standing up there on television, assuring the first responders it was perfectly safe for them to work in the wreckage of the World Trade Towers without special equipment. The air is fine, you can go on down there. And everybody who believed the head of the EPA has paid a horrible, horrible price for that. Okay, we're coming up on our first commercial break here, and we'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. Talk to you in a minute. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, there's kind of an interesting article here came out of Pamela Geller, who, as you know, got a very weird bias going on there. And she's got this story out there claiming that teachers are scared to teach about 9/11 as they're afraid of a backlash from the Muslim parents. And the article goes on about after Pearl Harbor, teachers were free to talk about what happened, or the official story about what happened, the same thing regarding Germany. I don't think it has anything to do with backlash from the Muslims. The difference today is the internet and the independent media. And people can go online and find out for themselves whether what the government is claiming is true or not. And the more we dig, the more we realize that we have spent our entire lives in this fog of lies coming from the government. Americans are the most lied to people on the face of the earth, and we have to understand that in order to move forward. Now, turning to the domestic political scene here, Steve Bannon is out there. He's opening up with both barrels. He's called Trump's firing of Comey a disaster, which I disagree with. I think Comey should have gone. I'm not sure that his replacement is really doing all that well. But Bannon is now devising a plan to shake up the Republican Party because he's seeing too much opposition to Trump from within his own party. And so Bannon is now courting a number of GOP primary opponents to go up against sitting Republican senators next year. I think that's a good thing. I think we need a lot of new blood there in Congress and Washington, D.C. These old, corrupted fossils need to go. We're going to take a phone call. Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I had a little visit with my general practitioner yesterday, and it was funny that the tech that was taking my blood pressure after she finished doing my vital signs, she said, "Oh, by the way, we just got our shipment in the flu vaccine 2 days ago. Would you like your flu vaccine?" So I just want to let you know that the stockpiles of flu vaccine have arrived, and you can just bet that the government's going to start using the fear campaign here pretty soon. This is going to be the deadliest one yet, and start pushing that fear factor to get people to comply with this fraudulent hoax of a vaccine.
Well, again, there's questions about whether it even works. There's questions. More and more people are starting to understand these vaccines are often causing the diseases they're supposed to protect us from. We've seen that repeatedly with the measles vaccine, the mumps vaccine, where all of a sudden, we'll see the news report about, oh, there's a mumps outbreak. It's a pandemic. And then you find out everybody who's come down with mumps actually had the vaccine. So it's
including the shingles. I found somebody else who had the shingles vaccine and got the shingles from it.
Yeah, this attenuated pathogen approach is very, very dangerous. First of all, not only can the vaccine make you ill, but you become infectious to everybody around you. And it's almost like there's a deliberate mechanism to try and keep us all sick in order to maximize the profitability for the medical industrial complex.
I follow, George Carlin made a comment once that made a lot of sense to me, and he said that you have an immune system for a reason, really to challenge your immune system, to strengthen your immune system by being exposed to certain things, and that we're pumping our bodies full of all these toxins, and what good and what use is your immune system if you want to put a vaccine in your body for every single thing out there? And you're actually doing yourself a disservice by not allowing your immune system to strengthen and become strong and needed when you need it. He said someday all these health nuts are going to be dying from nothing. His little bit was on that. So I do agree. If you don't use it, you lose it. And I think our immune systems are there for a reason, and we do need to challenge them. We need to use them and stop with all these quick fixes of vaccines and everything else. We need to stop that and actually rely on the immune system because that's what they've given us.
Well, unfortunately, the problem is some of the chemicals that are being used as adjuvants in these vaccines have been shown to actually permanently damage our own natural immune system. They don't want us to have natural immunity. They're trying to create a dependency on these shots. Oh, there's a new illness. Here, have a shot. They're literally operating on the same moral level as the old traveling Wild West medicine show. Steve, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Steve Bannon, first of all, the White House has already responded to Bannon's comment about Trump's worst decision by simply saying Steve Bannon talks in extremes, which isn't really a denial. It's an attempt to dismiss him and say, oh, he's just mouthing off. But he has come on out and said something that I think we all sort of intuitively understood from the beginning. Steve Bannon is out there saying that Hillary Clinton is not very bright. She's an excellent poseur. I mean, she's out there saying that if she'd won the presidency, she would have been seen as a genius. But frankly, looking back at her decision-making during the campaign, it seems her success is simply based on being willing to do things other people would not, like pay for play and knocking off her enemies and so forth and so on. And for 25 years, actually longer than that, Hillary's been in the public eye, and for all those years we're told again and again and again and again that Hillary's brilliant and Hillary's a warm, funny, vibrant, real person. No, she's a bitter old lady, and I'm not impressed with with her IQ, at least as it's been displayed on TV. And again, the bitterness is coming on out. She's still on her Sour Grapes tour. She's out there going to all these events, charging huge amounts of money for the tickets. I wonder how many people are actually showing up. Probably as many as attended her rally during last year's election. Now, interestingly enough, there's been a pushback on the FBI's denial of a Freedom of Information Act request for Hillary Clinton's emails. And the FBI came on out and said, we're not going to release them because there's a lack of public interest. Well, there is no lack of public interest exception to the Freedom of Information Act. The only exception is if there's national security involved or if somebody's privacy will be invaded. And sometimes even that one gets abused. When Alan Favish went before the Supreme Court trying to get the crime scene photos released of Vincent Foster's body to confirm reports that there had been a second gunshot wound to the neck, the Supreme Court ruled against him, saying that dead people have a right to privacy, which is absurd, but if you're covering up high-level assassination and corruption, you'll probably grasp at any straw that's offered to you. So here we are with the FBI saying the public isn't interested, therefore we don't have to release them, which is absurd. Obviously, Ty Clevenger, who filed the Freedom of Information Act request, he's interested. And so we're all scratching our heads about what the heck is going on here. And Clevenger isn't the type to give up easily, and he found a judge in Maryland who agrees that the willful destruction of evidence that was subject to a congressional subpoena is not a frivolous issue that suffers from an overwhelming lack of public interest. And apparently Maryland Judge Paul Harris Jr. has ordered the Maryland State Bar to investigate former Hillary aides David Kendall, Cheryl Mills, and Heather Samuelson for their efforts in allegedly helping Hillary destroy evidence. They're facing disbarment for what they did. 3 less lawyers we have to worry about, 3 less corrupt, crooked lawyers we have to worry about. Now, as you know, the corporate media and the Democrats and Hillary are still pushing this whole Russia collusion, Russia hacked the DNC servers, Russia's bad, Russia's evil, blah, 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 blah. And we're getting sick to death of hearing about it, especially because we understand there's a considerable amount of evidence that it wasn't an external hack, but an internal leak based on the metadata on the files themselves. They had to be copied from the server to a flash drive. They were copied too fast to be going out over the internet. And there are other indications as well, along with whatever's coming in from Julian Assange and various other parties. And apparently some of Seth Rich's family members are saying that he was the leaker as well, right up to the day he got murdered. So Adam Carter has published an article that says that Robert Mueller and Jeff Sessions have been personally informed of all of this information debunking the Russian hacking narrative, which means they can't go on pretending that they don't know about this. And this is coming out of Disobedient Media. And basically, Carter's been on the forefront of debunking the hacking narrative. He dismantled the Guccifer 2.0 persona, found out was right here in the United States. and basically creating the impetus and grounds for the analysis of the forensicator and corroborating the efforts of veteran intelligence professionals for sanity. So Sessions and Mueller are now aware of this information. They can't pretend they don't know there is this exculpatory information. Is that going to change the Russian hacking narrative? Of course not. Their job is to protect Hillary and the narcocracy and get Donald Trump out of there before he really causes trouble. Meanwhile, yet another anonymously sourced Trump-Russia story has fallen apart. Now, this all started when NBC News dropped what the network hyped as a potential bombshell last week about notes taken by Manafort during their Russian meeting, and it contained cryptic references to donations. That was the original headline. And the story claimed that Manafort's notes from the 2016 Trump Tower meeting with White House aide Jared Kushner, Donald Trump Jr., and a Russian lawyer included the word donations near a reference to the Republican National Committee. Then all of a sudden, NBC began walking back the potential bombshell almost immediately, issuing a correction saying that the word donation didn't actually appear in the notes, but quoting one anonymous source who said the word donor was in the notes. But NBC's corrected story still wasn't accurate. Politico came on out with a report saying that the word donor doesn't appear anywhere in Manafort's notes. And moreover, the notes are not seen as damaging to the Trump family or campaign officials. It's a big nothing burger. And NBC has got egg all over their face because they relied on two anonymous sources briefed on the evidence to run with the story. And then they wonder why people just won't trust the corporate media any longer. Meanwhile, the new FBI director is out there saying that he can see no evidence of White House interference in the Russia investigation. And that was a big stink. Mueller was out there trying to find something on that as grounds for impeachment of Donald Trump, that he fired Comey because Comey was getting too close to the Trump-Russia connection. And the new FBI director saying, no, it's not there. It's another nothing burger. So let's get on back to that bitter old lady, Hillary Clinton, who is becoming a caricature of herself at this point. And she's an embarrassment to the Democratic Party. They wish she would just fade away and stop yakking, because she's becoming a serious liability going into next year's midterm elections. But she's out there on her Sour Grapes tour, and apparently she's charging for the tickets, for the VIP tickets. Like there's going to be a huge crowd. They're going to come on in, and she's charging up to $2,375 for the VIP tickets. Lots and lots of money for doing absolutely nothing. When you're on a book tour, you don't charge admission. You sit there and you autograph the books so people will buy them. And, it's a bargain. It's a bargain. Amazon and Walmart have already slashed the price on Hillary Clinton's new book, What Happened, by 40% before the book is even officially released, which is actually today. Today it goes on sale, and it's already marked down 40%. I don't think they're going to sell very many of them, and I don't think people are going to show up at the Sour Grapes tour. I mean, there's always going to be some Democratic suck-ups who are going to want to get on the inside of the narcocracy and be the next generation. I imagine this is putting a lot of pressure on Chelsea Clinton. You know, she's got these two aging parents who are frustrated and they didn't get everything they wanted. You've got to go on out and be the president in my place. Now, the FBI has launched an investigation into Sputnik News. And basically, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov is saying this indicates serious censorship problems in the United States of America. And basically saying that the U.S. corporate media is just not used to competition, whether it's from foreign media or the independent media. And they're just out there to just try and shut everyone down who won't go along with the approved agenda. We're going to take some phone calls now. Willie in Nashville, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, sir. How are you today?
I'm hanging in there.
Yeah, man, do the thing. It's cool. Yes, sir. The purpose of this call, I was just curious. I've watched you on YouTube on the Ron Johnson channel, you know?
Yes.
And I was curious as to if you were familiar with the cat named Clinton Curtis. Clinton as in Bill Clinton, Curtis as in Curtis Mayfield. He was a computer programmer, worked for NASA, Marlboro, very high-level guy. And Tom Feeney of Florida, the state representative Tom Feeney, contracted Mr. Curtis, Curtis, contracted him to write a voting algorithm for electronic voting machines. And I don't know if you're hip to that or not.
Oh,
and
yeah, I've seen the video where he's testifying about this and said, yeah, it's very easy to rig these electronic machines to change the outcome of an election. And of course, the corporate media totally ignored him.
Yeah, and ironically, not even ironically, I think deliberately, in my opinion, the algorithm that he stated in that testimony to the Ohio State grand jury was 51.49%. And if you look at the timestamp, and I believe the timestamp is 2001, maybe 2002, somewhere in there on his testimony, if you'll notice, every major election this country has ever had since then has always come out 51 to 49% or very close to it. And I just wanted to, call and see if you're hip to that. And I thank you for your time. Love your show. And cheers, man.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. Yeah, we're very familiar with that. We've gone back and referenced that time and time again. Again, for those of you who are just now becoming hip to this whole issue of how easy it is to rig elections with these electronic machines, I recommend you go over to blackboxvoting.org. It's run by a wonderful lady named Bev Harris. In fact, there was an HBO documentary that featured her and her work called Hacking Democracy. And what is really interesting, the finale of the documentary, is they go into this Elections Commission warehouse, they select a voting machine at random, and they're able to rig the outcome of a demonstration election they hold right there in the office without even touching the machine itself. And what was really amazing, touching, is one of the people who worked at the Election Commission, she just broke down in tears, because she believed she was serving democracy and helping to guarantee an honest election. And all of a sudden she realized she was right in the heart of a gigantic fraud. We're going to go back to the phones here. Joe in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I was just curious if I'm the only one that I'm picking up this signals from Trump about Trump maybe going to the gold standard or something. I mean, when he first came in to be president, I mean, all of a sudden, all the draperies and the seats, everything went to gold, And I mean, I'm looking back at Trump. I grew up in New York. I remember when he was getting started. I was a kid and all that. But all his buildings had the big gold Trump signs up there, and I just, for some reason, like on a certain level, I just affiliate him with gold, the color gold, the gold-plated this, gold. And I'm just wondering, it's weird about people in that respect, and the way society works and everything. And I just have a feeling there's something going on with that,
Well, as you point out, Trump has always had this affinity for gold as the facade of his buildings, and it may be partly that he is impressed with gold. I mean, he's a very, very wealthy man, and wealthy people tend to think about gold a lot. Or it may just be his way of trying to convey a sense of wealth and power to the people who are renting space in his buildings or staying at his hotels and resorts. Now, as far as the gold curtains in the Oval Office, those are actually brought back from Bill Clinton's Oval Office, and that may have been a thumbing of his nose to the Clintons. But yes, there's no question that Trump's favorite color is gold. I don't necessarily know that signals something. I think it's more significant that he has a portrait of Andrew Jackson in the Oval Office, the man who shut down the second bank of the United States. But I'm sure that Donald Trump has been told by now that presidents who attempt to get in the way of the private central scammers, private central bankers, bad things tend to happen to them, including an attempt on Andrew Jackson's life, Lincoln's assassination, Kennedy's assassination, and a few more than that. And again, if you go back and you read the original text file of All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, you're going to find, you know, people who died under very weird circumstances who were opposed to the private central banks. They've been running this scam on the human race for 300 years. They're not about to give it up without a fight.
Well, I'm just getting a feel for him that he's definitely pro gold standard. Just that he sent the Secretary of Treasury to Fort Knox to look it over, and just something about him. I look at Trump as a sleeper patriot. I kind of agree with Alex Jones on that. I think he was groomed from when he was a kid to be president. I mean, there's a lot of weird things like him being on The Simpsons, you know, Nixon saying he should be president, Ronald Reagan shaking his hand and saying, I felt like I was shaking the president's hand. There's a lot of weird things about Trump in that regard, and I think that the whole gold thing is kind of some kind of a symbol on a higher level. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about was this Hillary's hair thing. I mean, are you familiar with this? This guy Skreckle or Skrelly, he put out a $5,000 bounty on somebody getting Hillary's hair. And
that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. That's absurd.
Well, no, but they had a person today being interviewed on Alex Jones's show. And she went to one of her book signings, and when she was getting
I'm going to hold you over the commercial break. Don't hang up. We'll come back. I do want to hear this. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking with Joe in Tennessee, and we're talking about Hillary's hair. Now, when you first said that, I flashed back to Bill Clinton's administration, where they were making a big deal over the fact that every time Hillary Clinton made a personal appearance, she had a new hairstyle. Somebody even actually started a website, hillaryhair.com, where they just had photos of all the different, coiffes that she was wearing. And it certainly gave off the image of her being an extraordinarily vain woman as well. But now you're telling me somebody has literally put a bounty on a physical sample of her hair?
Well, the interesting thing is Alex Jones had this lady on his show who went to one of her book signings and confronted her on a bunch of questions about, Seth Rich and all the different, the 30,000 emails deleted. And as she was being thrown out, the Secret Service asked her a whole ton of questions about was she there to cut her hair. And then I looked into it, and I found out that this guy that had that drug company that was gouging, Skreckle or Skrelly, he put a $5,000 bounty out for somebody to get her hair so he could test it. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, Mike. I'm kooky in that I really think Hillary Clinton either died or was totally incapacitated last September 11th when they put her in the meat wagon. And I think we've been dealing with a fake Hillary ever since. I mean, sometimes I see Hillary on TV and she says she wants to be a televangelist. Well, this is probably the young fake Hillary who she's not the same woman. I think that, and that's what, when I heard about this, my hairs went up and I said, wow, maybe there's more going on here than meets the eye. Because,
let's back up here a little bit. First of all, yes, Hillary was busted for using a double in certain circumstances, but I'm pretty certain that the woman who's out there on the Sour Grapes tour is the real Hillary Clinton. Now, unless the hair includes the little bud at the bottom, you can't test for DNA on hair. But what you can do is your hair is actually a record of all the medications and drugs that you have been taking, laid out over time. In fact, they were able to determine that Napoleon Bonaparte was in fact poisoned by analyzing a sample of his hair. So that may be what this gentleman wants to do, is find out what medications she's on or what drugs she's taking. to keep her going. But again, we know that Hillary used to double during the strain of the campaign, but at this particular point, I haven't seen her at the book signings, but I have no reason to doubt that it's really her, because who else would put themselves through that kind of humiliation?
Well, I mean, you get a body double, and she's going to, go back to, Altoona, Pennsylvania, and do nightclub acts? I mean, so she's making the tour, she's going on The View. I wouldn't put anything past these Clintons. I mean, Hillary herself is an industry, and if that industry all of a sudden collapsed in a coma on September 11th last year, do you really think would you really find it that hard to believe that the Clintons and that whole industry behind them would manufacture Hillary and keep the thing going?
I think,
I don't find that hard to believe at all.
Look at how quickly my turn. Look at how quickly we spotted the fake. Okay, they couldn't get away with it. Thank you for the call. We got to let you go for station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And one of our members has just posted a link from whatreallyhappened.com to a video where Hillary's confronted at a book signing about the 33,000 missing emails, and Seth Rich. I don't know if it's exactly the same event that the last caller was talking about, but apparently it's not. The book tour really isn't a pleasant experience at all. So, welcome back to our show. It's hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, there has been a new development in the investigation into the shoot-down of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. Now, late in August, Russia handed over decoded radar data to the Netherlands, which is in charge of this so-called international investigation into the shoot-down of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. Now, Russia had already sent all this information over in its coded form, but they provided the software needed to decode it. But the Dutch investigators, despite having the latest in modern technology, claimed they were not able to decode the recordings, and they basically ignored what was in them while they keep trying to say that, oh yes, it was the Russia that shot down MH17. This new data provided by Russia is the uncoded radar data, and clearly shows that the missile that is thought to have brought down MH17 was fired from the zone controlled by the Ukrainian military. So there's the hard data on that one. Now, the Trump administration is urging Congress to renew the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is due to expire the end of this year. And, of course, the whole Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act has become a big joke. And it's a rubber stamp that allows the government to violate the constitutional rights of Americans. Now, supposedly the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act only applies to outside the United States of America, but as is typical with many of the laws passed by the government, there's a little bit of mission creep or application creep. And more we're finding that American citizens inside the United States are coming under surveillance approved by the FISA court. And it's very, very rare for the FISA court to reject a request for a wiretap. So it's just bypassing due process. It's a shortcut for the dictatorship. Now, there's an article that came out of Zero Hedge, and it has a wonderful metaphor for what's going on with our country, and it's called the sandcastle. And you work very hard to build a sandcastle at the beach, and then the tide comes in, and it's gone almost immediately. And the subtitle in this article is "The Decline from Democracy to Tyranny is Inevitable." And I'm sorry to say that, yes, I agree. If you are as old as I am, and if you are, you have my deepest sympathies. You remember in our youth where the Bill of Rights was an absolute. We weren't hearing all this talk about, there must be limits on freedom of speech. We have to take away the guns. Their right to privacy is a threat to national security, and on and on and on. And now, of course, we're becoming aware of just how fraudulent our election system is. And our republic, with a democratically elected government, is being washed away before our very eyes, just like that sandcastle. It's a beautiful image. Now, back in 2009, Ron Paul made a comment saying, what if the American people woke up and understood that the official reasons for going to war are almost always based on lies and promoted by war propaganda in order to serve special interests? That was back in 2009. I think here in 2017, more and more Americans are waking up to that reality. Saddam did not have nuclear weapons. Assad was not gassing his own people. There were no torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. There was no Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. The Lusitania was smuggling weapons to Great Britain. And Pearl Harbor was not a surprise. Roosevelt worked for a year to goad the Japanese into that attack. Truth is the first casualty of war. So the big question is going to be, what big lie are they going to try next to get us all riled up to go to war against whoever it is they need to go to war against? At this point, our government is so desperate for a major war to cover the coming economic crash, it almost seems like they don't care who the war is going to be against. North Korea, fine. Yemen, fine. Russia, fine. China, fine. We don't care. We'll go to war against Australia if we have to. Let's invade Canada. That's my favorite Michael Moore movie, Canadian Bacon, because he was bang spot on that link between elections, war, and the military-industrial complex. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining the network, and a reminder, our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Get some of these listeners on the affiliates to call into the show here. Now, as you know, U.S. Senator Bob Menendez is on trial right now for corruption, and a former staffer has basically testified that Menendez was engaging in a little pay-for-play, helping with the visa applications of friends of a wealthy doctor who is facing bribery charges alongside Menendez. And Menendez attorneys are trying to show that Menendez's actions were unremarkable and part of the normal duties of his office. Menendez may have actually believed that. Certainly Hillary Clinton did. Yeah, you get money, you do favors for people. But under direct questioning from the government, former senior policy advisor Mark Lopez testified Menendez emailed him in 2008 authorizing a letter of support from Menendez to be sent to consular officials regarding the visa applications of two sisters from the Dominican Republic. And one of the emails had the subject line, Dr. Melgen's request. So it's not looking good at all. And what is it with these politicians? The mayor of Seattle, well, actually he's not the mayor anymore. He just resigned. And apparently a fifth accuser has come forward accusing him of sexual molestation. And the latest accuser is his cousin, saying that Murray repeatedly molested him in the 1970s when he was a teenager. Kind of makes you wonder what sort of character, what sort of person is drawn to political power. And the answer is a sociopath, because they're exhibiting all that other behavior. Bill Bonner is out there saying that Congress is a carnival of claptrap, basically saying that there was never any possibility that Congress was going to hold to the debt ceiling, because they're not thinking about what's good for the United States and the people. They have cronies to pay off. They have promises to keep to their financial backers. And if that means driving the American people deeper into debt to pay for it all, well, that's just the way these things are going to work. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on in the war zones. Apparently, U.S.-led coalition warplanes bombed a military convoy belonging to the Syrian army east of Deir ez-Zor. Gee, I wonder which side the U.S. is on. Well, if you look at this story, along with the U.S. airlifting out the ISIS commanders, it's very obvious that the U.S. and ISIS are the real allies in there against Bashar al-Assad. And apparently they're still trying to figure out a way that they can get in there and get Assad out. So the U.S.-led coalition warplanes bombed this convoy near Al Taim oil field east of Deir ez-Zor, killing and wounding several Army members and destroying armored vehicles. So it's pretty obvious what the U.S. is in there for, and it's not to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They're still out there hoping that they can find a way to get Assad. Now, Syria is responding to the recent UN report that supported the idea that Assad was gassing his own people, even though it didn't really have any convincing evidence of that. And Syria is now taking the position that the United Nations is basically running a systematic campaign of disinformation that may constitute a war crime. And that the United Nations has become captive of the U.S. foreign policy. That the United Nations is no longer independent. It has become subservient to the United States. And that is a very dangerous situation. Now, apparently ISIS has come on out with a new propaganda video, which is just more of the same thing, waving the flags and so forth and so on. But it is remarkable in one thing. In this video, which was shot near Raqqa, they're displaying their new favorite battle rifle, which turns out to be a modified M14 manufactured in the United States of America. Gee, I wonder how they got those guns. And apparently these U.S.-made rifles are winding up in the hands of ISIL, Daesh in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Somebody is taking those weapons in there. Remember that story that broke about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, where the U.S. was sending weapons into the Syrian rebels under the cover of diplomatic flights. And the reporter who broke that story, boy, did they get in trouble here. Meanwhile, Israel has basically advanced into Syrian territory. Israeli army forces yesterday advanced 200 meters into Be'er Ajam in the countryside of Quneitra, inside the Syrian territory. Now, 200 meters may not sound like much, but it's the camel's nose under the edge of the tent. And apparently the Israeli occupation forces entered Syrian territory backed up by bulldozers, tanks, and military vehicles. And the troops are basically digging in, it appears. Now, meanwhile, Avigdor Lieberman is out there warning the Syrians any confrontation will end badly for you. And that's because Syria is threatening repercussions following the Israeli airstrikes to the State Scientific Studies and Research Center, and of course now this military incursion. So what we have here is this absurd situation of Israel is attacking Syria and then warning them not to make a fuss about it. Like Israel has a natural right to just bomb other people's countries. It's a bad habit they've picked up from the United States of America. Now, apparently, the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has held talks with President Bashar al-Assad in Damascus, talking about military cooperation and joint actions against the U.S.-backed terrorists in Syria. In short, the U.S. just lost Syria. Syria is pivoting toward Russia. When this is all over and done with, Syria is going to be in the Russian sphere of influence. They botched this one badly. Actually, they've kind of botched up the whole thing all along. The more aggressive the United States becomes, the more countries are pivoting away from the West and toward Russia and China. Meanwhile, Russia has sent a message to the United States, stop destroying our relationship and start solving the problems you yourself have caused. And that's a very insightful comment. We're seeing the U.S. and Russia in this tit-for-tat attack on each other's diplomatic forces. And Russia is saying further retaliatory measures against U.S. diplomats are imminent. And so Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov in Helsinki is saying, we're urging the U.S. to stop destroying Russian-American relations and undermining international law and to occupy themselves with solving problems that have arisen not due to any fault of our own. In other words, you made this mess. You fix it. Now, interestingly enough, there is, over in Germany, we're coming up on their elections, and it's getting tense over there. The left lead candidate, Sarah Wagenknecht, is out there saying it's time to end NATO and replace it with a security organization that includes Russia. And is saying the Russian sanctions are counterproductive. They're not going to work in the eastern Ukraine. The conflict has to be solved diplomatically. The Minsk agreement is being undermined by both sides. We need to create new trust. Well, again, as I've said before, to have peace, everybody must agree. But it only takes one tyrant with an invasion force to keep the war going. And right now, the U.S. government, unfortunately, is not interested in peace with anybody. They're desperate to get a war going, to plunder and loot other countries to keep our private central bankers happy. And if 1 million of your children have to die, well, that's just the cost of doing business. Just the cost of doing business. We got too many people around here anyway. And if they really think they're going to build an effective army out of all these refugees and illegal immigrants, they are dreaming, because those people do not have an emotional tie to this country and this land. They're going to put them out there on the front lines. They get shot at. They're going to drop their weapons and cower in a foxhole. Now, the president of Iraqi Kurdistan is basically saying that they're tired of waiting and they're going to draw their own borders of a future Kurdish state if Baghdad does not accept a vote for independence in a referendum due later this month. So there may be a whole new Iraq war going on. The Kurds against the Iraqis. Now, Israel wants an independent Kurdistan, and the U.S. is certainly on board with that idea as well, because the real agenda is to break up the larger Middle East nations into smaller pieces that are easier to bully and push around. They want to start breaking up Iraq. They're going to carve part of Turkey and Syria off of this new Kurdistan and make a new small country. And that's the real goal here. Israel has been wanting to break up all those other larger Middle Eastern countries. They want to redraw the map. Again, to have lots and lots of little tiny countries that are easy to manipulate and exploit or invade when necessary. Now, here is a little bit of interesting news. Apparently, the Saudi Crown Prince had a secret visit to Israel, and everybody is wondering what's going on, if this may be involved with the breakup of the Shia Crescent as their primary policy. But what's really interesting is that Saudi Arabia still does not recognize the Jewish state, and officially, Israel and Saudi Arabia do not have diplomatic relations. Well, apparently that may be about to change. Okay, we're going to take a phone call now. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Mike. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, you was talking with one of the callers who had called in regards to the CIA PSYOPs program. I have a quick question. Do you think Sirhan was your typical Manchurian candidate, or was he a patsy, or he didn't do the shooting?
Oh, he's definitely a patsy, and he may have fired a gun, but that wasn't the only gun that was present in that pantry, because Sirhan was several feet in front of Robert Kennedy, and the shot that was fatal was fired into Robert Kennedy's head behind his ear. It had to come from behind him. And so while Sirhan was drawing everybody's attention, somebody got a shot off. And again, Sirhan's gun only held 8 rounds. The police recovered 11 bullets from that pantry. So he was definitely set up to be the patsy. A lot of people who saw him before the shooting said it looked like he was drugged out and just not really there. He was being led around by this woman in a polka dot dress, which the authorities attempted after the fact to claim did not exist, that everybody had seen the girl in the polka dot dress. They were just hallucinating, even though the LAPD put out an all-points bulletin to find her. Tony, got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mike.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, apparently, Israel is sticking its nose into the Iran deal, even though it was never part of the original P5+1. And Israel's intelligence minister, Israel Katz, is basically saying that Prime Minister Netanyahu must demand from President Trump that he freeze, change, or cancel the Iran nuclear deal. And they're out there saying the lesson from North Korea is that talks and compromise are not going to work. Well, North Korea is only arming itself in response to U.S. aggression. And the counter lesson there is Iran has gone along with ending its nuclear program just the way that Saddam Hussein gave up all of his chemical weapons, and they're still in the crosshairs of the United States. Now, again, I want to remind everybody, the United Nations, AIEA, the International Atomic Inspection people, have certified once again Iran is fully in compliance with the P5+1 deal requirements. And Nikki Haley and Donald Trump are out there trying to sell the idea that they can end the deal, that they have grounds to end the deal because they don't feel Iran is enthusiastic enough about compliance. You know, they're sulking, or they're building ballistic missiles, which were never in that original agreement. But here you have Israel is out there saying, you will attack Iran for us. And apparently our government is saying, yes, massa, yes, massa, yes, massa. We will send other people's children over there to basically go after Iran. Now, do you remember in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq that claim that Niger was shipping yellow cake uranium to Iraq? And it turned out to be a forged document, and George W. Bush was on TV saying, see, Iraq is buying uranium, and because Israel bombed their power plant, the only reason they could have for uranium is they're building a bomb. And it turned out to be a complete hoax. And it was never really a convincing argument because Iraq has plenty of natural uranium on their own soil. They don't need to be buying it from Niger. But the document did turn out to be a forgery. Well, having learned nothing at all from that embarrassment, apparently they're trying it again, where the media outlets are reporting on a letter supposedly by the Somali foreign minister that al-Shabaab was mining uranium for transport to Iran. So they're trying it all over again. And basically Cindy Vestergaard, a senior associate with the Nuclear Safeguards, is rejecting this story, saying it's nonsense. And again, Iran also has lots of uranium within their own borders. They don't need to get it from outside. The only reason to claim it's coming from outside is so you can claim there's a paper trail. But Fox News came on out there, Al-Qaeda affiliate mining uranium to send to Iran. Somali official warns U.S. ambassador. Voice of America came out, Somalia seeks U.S. help, says militant plot to supply uranium to Iran. So it's a replay of that yellow cake, the original Nigerian scam. Are they going to set off a nuclear bomb someplace and claim that Iran did it or North Korea did it? That's what it's going to take to really get the wars going. Because the American people have become, first of all, war-weary. Second of all, skeptical, highly skeptical of anything coming out of the government and the corporate media. And they're jaded from all of this. Now, American Jewish archaeologist and Zionist propagandist Alex Jaffe has suggested it's time for economic sabotage and cyber warfare against Iran. Once again, Israel's at the forefront of trying to stir up trouble. Psychologists call it, let's you and him fight. And we've all met people like that, people who love to provoke others into conflict with each other. They never get into a fight themselves, but they get a thrill out of just steering other people into conflict. And Israel does that all the time. Israel doesn't want to fight their own fight. That's what the Goyim are for. We'll send them out to destroy our enemies. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And going on back to the news here, apparently Russia is going to be loaning 1.2 billion euros to Iran to construct a new power plant project. Basically, Russia is giving or loaning the money to Iran, who will then hire Russia to build this new power plant, which makes sense because Russia built the one they've already got. But Iran is going nuclear because they know that sooner or later the oil under the ground is going to run on out, and it's time to start making those changes here. Now, here's an interesting development. Apparently, Tillerson is out there demanding Donald Trump ask Israel to return $75 million in U.S. aid. Now, it's not a significant amount compared to what Israel is getting, but apparently the State Department has been lobbying the White House to convince Israel to hand back the aid it was given last year over and above the normal military aid that it receives annually. And basically, last year, then President Barack Obama's administration came under fire for trying to limit Israel's ability to lobby with Congress for more money in case new conflicts break out in the Middle East. Well, I think that Israel should be limited in lobbying Congress. And one of the things that really annoys me is how AIPAC is not required to register as the agent of a foreign government, even though everything coming out of AIPAC is about Israel, 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 Israel. Meanwhile, Netanyahu has got a good reason to be invading Syria or Lebanon or anybody else that he can think of, is because apparently the Israeli authorities are getting close to criminal indictments for both Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife. And the threat of criminal indictment is hung for months over Netanyahu and loomed much larger this weekend as it was announced that his wife faced potential criminal charges. So at least Israel's government is trying to deal with the corruption in high level. In our country, they're going to throw Menendez to the wolves to protect everybody else. Now, do you remember there is this 96-year-old guy named Hubert Zafke, and he has been hauled into court because he was a medic at Auschwitz. And so he collectively is guilty of exterminating 87 billion Jews who were held at Auschwitz, or whatever the number is these days. And a lot of people were saying, this is really ridiculous. He's 96 years old. He was a medic. He was there, to help people. And yes, the workers in these slave labor camps, the Germans took good care of them because they were an asset. And they were manufacturing materials needed by the German army. So if you got cut or scrape or anything, you would go see the medics and they would bandage you up and put you back to work. And that's what this Hubert did. He was not involved in any atrocities, which nobody can really seem to prove anyway. And apparently the court has thrown the case out saying he's suffering from dementia. He doesn't even know where he is. He's 96 years old. And they finally come to the conclusion he's not able to stand trial. He's not able to remember anything about Auschwitz. He's just mentally incompetent. And they realize just how terrible it looks putting somebody like that on trial. It's like in the medieval world where they would dig somebody's body up, put them on trial for something they were supposed to have done, and then flog the corpse and rebury it. It was ridiculous. Meanwhile, of course, Netanyahu's got to be just going out of his mind. He's running out of real Nazis to wag at people to get donations and stuff. Now, as we reported yesterday, the United Nations Security Council unanimously passed a watered-down version of the sanctions against North Korea. Some of the most onerous parts that called for by the United States were taken on out. And basically, they're stronger than the previous sanctions. But everybody's saying this isn't going to work. Sanctions have not worked. And again, North Korea has the examples of Iran and Iraq to look at. If you give the U.S. government what they want, if you disarm, you are still going to be invaded. That's what happened in Iraq. That's what's getting ready to happen in Iran. From Kim Jong-un's point of view, he would be insane to give up his nuclear deterrent. And so sanctions aren't going to work. Now remember, China has already threatened that if the U.S. attacks North Korea without just cause, China will intervene. And that guarantees there's going to be some kind of a false flag. They're going to set off a nuclear bomb somewhere out here in the Pacific Ocean and say, oh, North Korea was attacking us. Thank goodness it missed. But I'm sure it'll be close enough to some tourist destination where lots and lots of pictures will be taken of the mushroom cloud out there on the horizon. Meanwhile, more and more people are becoming very concerned over the Punggye-ri nuclear test site, which appears to have been seriously fractured by that last H-bomb test. And people are very concerned that more testing could cause landslides that would expose some of the trapped nuclear materials from the earlier tests. And again, I would hope that North Korea is simply going to find a new mountain to conduct their tests in. Boy, if you look at the western United States and you look at all those nuclear test sites, it's just amazing how many craters. You look in Google Earth, you look up around Groom Lake there, you just see hundreds, almost 1,000 craters in all these various nuclear test sites. These were above-ground tests, by the way, for the most part. Now, Russia has test-fired an ICBM from the Plesetsk Cosmodrome up in Russia's north. You're not hearing a big hue and cry about it. Nobody's screaming that Russia's being provocative. It's just a missile test. But boy, oh boy, every time North Korea fires off a test rocket, oh, it's a provocation. They're coming for war. It's kind of a double standard here. The U.S. is always testing their missiles. They fire off a lot of those tests from right here in Hawaii, over on Kauai, the Pacific Missile Test Range. The last two tests of THAAD up in Alaska, the target missile was launched from right here in Hawaii. Nobody makes a big deal about that. Nobody says the U.S. is being provocative. It's only North Korea. They're being provocative. How dare they prepare to slow down our invasion? Don't they understand the United States is exceptional and we have the right to invade anybody that we feel like? How dare they ignore the rules we just made up here? Now, turning to the economic news, the European Union is very worried over the current U.S. economic chaos, and it is. And basically, they're blaming it on Donald Trump, but Donald Trump did not create this mess. It was created for him long ago. But they're basically acknowledging something that we've been saying all along. The U.S. is in the process of forfeiting its position of economic supremacy. And an internal EU document shows the Europeans are worried. Well, they've got their own currency, the euro. So they're relatively isolated. They're not dependent on the U.S. dollar. And more nations are delinking from the dollar because everybody can see the writing on the wall. The entire U.S. economy is a giant bubble. The stock market is a bubble. Real estate is a bubble. Car loans are a bubble. Education is a bubble. It's all one giant bubble pumped up to look impressive, and there's nothing inside. Now, over in China, a Beijing court sentenced the architect of the $9 billion Yizhubao online financial scam to life imprisonment and handed down jail time to 26 others, marking the close to one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in modern Chinese history. And the ruling comes at a time when the Chinese government is stepping up their efforts to crack down on risky and illicit behavior in the country's financial sector, including the unruly peer-to-peer industry that continues to attract high volumes. We need more of that here. And yes, Bernie Madoff got brought down for his Ponzi scheme, but I think he was brought down mostly because he was cheating his own people. And we know there's a lot of fraud on Wall Street that is simply ignored. And again, there was a documentary that came on out about the 2008 meltdown called Inside Job. It won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Documentary and then pretty much vanished from the American scene to be replaced by this hastily put together HBO movie that tried to portray all these Wall Street people as heroic figures struggling with forces beyond their control, which was just a big pile of bovine excrement, not really worth watching here. Now, the U.S. has filed a civil lawsuit in federal court in Brooklyn against Paul Mangione. He's the former Deutsche Bank head of subprime trading, and he is accused of defrauding investors in mortgage-backed securities sold before the financial crisis. Well, good. Finally, they're going after some of these people. Mangione misled investors about the quality of the loans underlying $1.4 billion in mortgage-backed securities, resulting in hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. The case against the former trader came after the bank in January reached a $7.2 billion settlement with Deutsche Bank in a related case over risky mortgage securities sold to investors. Well, I'm glad they're finally getting there, but that was really the essence of the scam. They took all these mortgages, many of which were already in default, put them into these bundles. The ratings agency said these are AAA, pensions could invest in them. In some cases, the same mortgages were being attached to different bundles, multiple bundles. That's fraud right there. And the SEC looked the other way until the whole thing imploded. And here we are just about 10 years later. And they're finally starting to deal with some of these criminals here. Now, interestingly enough, the Federal Reserve has come out with a new report about the current state of the U.S. economy. And amazingly, $102 billion in credit card debt, student and auto loans was revised away. If you look at the chart there, there's this all of a sudden drop. And nobody has an explanation for that. We know that all of that money wasn't repaid. But somebody just decided, for the sake of the bookkeeping not looking all that bad about the nation's indebtedness, they were just going to put that somewhere else. It's the same thing they do with the unemployment rate. If you have been out of work for more than a month, you're not classed as unemployed anymore. You're put in another category. And that wonderfully low unemployment number that they like to wave at you is really based just on people who only recently lost their job. And the almost 100 million Americans who are willing and able to work but haven't found work in months or years are simply ignored. They're not included in the calculation because we got to make the numbers look good. Now, a new report has come on out. This is Investment Watch blog. They're going back and they're looking at the housing market crash that was part of that 2008 meltdown. And the analysts have said that the subprime borrowers were not to blame. You probably remember back then the corporate media was out there saying, oh, it's those subprime borrowers, you know, they couldn't pay those adjustable rate mortgages, which was definitely true because the teaser rates were very low to get them in there. There was even an $8,000 tax credit passed by Congress to get people to buy their first home. And then they took that $8,000 back in subsequent tax years. But they lured these people in, they front-loaded the system, and they got into trouble. But the real problem that triggered the housing market crash were the house flippers. People who were buying a house in the morning and then selling it that same afternoon at a huge markup. And they're the ones who drove that real estate market way up. And hang on a second, I got a problem. Here we go. They drove the market way up. And that, of course, was luring a lot of people in to buy houses as a get-rich-quick scheme. And then it all fell apart. So it was the house flippers, the get-rich-quick schemers, who drove everything out of control, not the borrowers themselves. They just wanted a home. That's all they wanted. Now, the Chinese government has informed the Wall Street Journal they're about to shut down all domestic Bitcoin exchanges. And apparently they're trying to get their economy back under control. And they're very concerned that the ultra-rich in China are using Bitcoin as a means to shuffle their wealth to tax havens around the world. So they're trying to rein that in, and the cryptocurrencies are starting to take a little bit of a beating there. Another story coming out of FortRuss.com. U.S. government debt tops $20 trillion. This exceeds the annual GDP of the United States. And basically, the U.S. national debt increased by $318 billion in just one day. And this, of course, follows Donald Trump in Congress last week agreeing on a temporary increase in the ceiling of the national debt. It's not going to be temporary. They're never going to put it back down again. They can't pay down the debt. They've never been able to pay it down. And so the issue is now postponed until December. Now, like everything else, the official government debt is less than accurate. The true scale of the government's debt, when you take in all the unfunded mandates, is over $100 trillion. We're in a really serious mess, and that is why the U.S. government is desperate to get a big bloody war going, so they got something to blame the coming crash on, or at least distract from it. Because they've done it before. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, and we are definitely on the brink. Now, Bernie Sanders is out there co-sponsoring a new bill to provide single-payer health coverage for all Americans. He's basically calling it the Medicare for All bill, and it's basically signaling that universal health care and Obamacare is definitely going to be a major issue in next year's midterms, and especially in 2020 for the next presidential election. We got to take a break here for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, getting on back to the wars and how it's all driven by money. It's important to remember that the U.S. began their plot to overthrow Syria's President Bashar al-Assad all the way back in 2006, right after Assad's government dropped the U.S. dollar. That was the motive. Same reason they went after Saddam, same reason they went after Gaddafi. They're sending a message. You will use our currency or bad things will happen to you. That's what's driving all of this. And those of you who are parents of children approaching military age, you got to keep that in mind before you let those recruiters grab your kid away. Because that's what they really want your kid to do, is force other countries to use our dollar. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Al in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I hope you're doing well.
Doing fine.
I just sent you, a couple of minutes ago, I sent you an email. I love these charts. It compares the U.S. to Canada in terms of house prices and household debt, and it's actually shocking. I mean, up here in Canada, the newspapers and whatnot are saying, hey, you know, everything's going great. You know, the economy is booming. We're in debt up to our eyeballs, worse than the United States has ever seen. Now, mind you, student loan debt is still low. It's not $1.5 trillion. It's not even 10 times less than that. I think it's sitting at about $30 billion. But still, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm looking at the charts right now. Isn't
that magnificent? They're older.
That's amazing.
So,
it's tragic is what it is.
Set it all off?
Well, you need to understand that the global economic theory is skewed because everybody seems to be in debt, and you're wondering, where did all this money go? Well, it went into the pockets of the private central bankers. The private central banking is a mechanism that basically pumps wealth from ordinary working people into the pockets of the bankers. And we all need to understand that.
Oh, I understand it. I think United States Central Bank, European Central Bank, and the Japanese Central Bank, on their books that we know of, have right now a fifth of the world economy's balance sheet sitting on their books right now. It's around $4.5–5 trillion on each of those central banks, and that's only those three central banks, and that's only what we know of. It's like you said, everything is upside down. It's madness.
It is.
Whatever happened to savings?
Well, the savings are gone. And remember last year where they were saying that the problem with the U.S. economy is people were hanging onto their money. They're being greedy. They're hoarding their cash in savings accounts. And they were even talking about penalizing savings account to get people to dump their money into circulation. Didn't work because nobody actually had any savings. We got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're just now getting word that Arizona Republican Representative Trent Franks is calling for Robert Mueller to resign from the position as special counsel. And the reasons for that, we've always talked about it, his very close friendship with former FBI Director James Comey, whose firing was the chief impetus for Mueller's appointment by the Department of Justice. And basically, Franks is out there saying that Mueller is in clear violation of federal codes and must resign to maintain the integrity of the investigation into these alleged Russia ties. And the other problem, of course, is the fact that Mueller has loaded up his team with very obvious, Democrats, very hard and fast Democrats donated to Hillary Clinton for president. And obviously, if you've got nothing but Democrats on your team, it calls into question the impartiality of that investigation. And so apparently the hue and cry is starting for Mueller to step on down. Now remember, Mueller was himself head of the FBI, and was appointed as head of the FBI just 1 week before 9/11. So, all righty, we're going to take a phone call. Terry in Oregon, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, yesterday on 9/11, you kind of blew me off there. And I think your point was that video we saw of the airplane going in the side of the building was authentic. And I just got a question. Why didn't those pylon shear points and the wing shear points give way instead of going through thick steel girders reinforced with concrete?
Well, where
I got experience with
hang on. First of all, where the planes hit was not reinforced steel or concrete. The outer cladding of that building was aluminum. And basically, it was not designed to deflect an impact, but to absorb one. That was how the buildings were designed to survive the impact of a loaded passenger jet, specifically a 707, was that they would allow the plane to slide in rather than try and have the entire building deflect that impact. And if you think about it, that's the same kind of thinking that you have underlying earthquake-proof buildings, where they don't make the building rigid to withstand an earthquake, but they make it flexible so that it will yield to the force rather than having breakage. Okay?
Yeah, so, I saw a thing where a guy demonstrated that with a screen. He put pencil in it, and he said it was designed like that. So that gives some kind of credibility to what you're saying. But, when the smoke all cleared, the dust cleared, you could see columns going vertically, in the outline of an airplane going in there. Are those columns part of the aluminum?
There are some steel supports in there. In fact, that's one of the reasons why the building was in serious trouble over and above the EPA-mandated renovation, because it was becoming subject to galvanic corrosion because of the salt air coming in off the Atlantic, where you had these two metals, aluminum and steel, in contact, and you add the salt air, and it actually generates a very small electric current. But over time, that current literally starts to eat away at the metal.
Okay, so you saw that outline of the airplane going through I thought was a steel structure, but you're saying it's aluminum. You think that's authentic, right?
Yeah, I think that's authentic. I mean, and again, you had all those people on the street who saw the plane hit. You had the Naudet brothers catching that first impact on video. You had all those firefighters out there shouting profanities when they saw what was going on. This idea that there were no planes at the World Trade Towers is just put out there to try and make the truth movement look very, very silly. So thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And getting on back to the real news here. The European Union apparently is expecting that the Brexit talks are going to break down and that there will be no agreement for Great Britain to leave the European Union. Of course, the European Union doesn't want them to leave because together with Germany, Great Britain has basically been the main economic support for the rest of the European Union, and Germany cannot sustain that all by themselves. So apparently Brussels is making contingency plans for what to do in case the Brexit talks collapse without agreement. Personally, I think Great Britain ought to just do a hard Brexit. Just pull the plug and say, we are out of here. Because already we're seeing all these political machinations of people who want to sabotage Brexit. To heck with the will of the people. You know, we're building a new world order, and we can't have bits and pieces breaking off. That's what happened to Rome when the outlying provinces began to break away, like Britain. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining the show. Apparently, over in Germany, Angela Merkel, as she heads into the new round of elections, she's starting to reverse her stance on migrants. And everybody is seeing it as an obvious flip-flop, as the chancellorship is now at stake. She understands, the German voters understand, the Bundestag understand. She doesn't really have a lock on the chancellorship. Now, again, the way it works in Germany, the people don't vote for the chancellor. The chancellor is elected by the German parliament. But if enough of those chairs change, then she could be out. So now all of a sudden, as she's going around Germany and she's being pelted with tomatoes and all the rest of that, she's starting to come on back and say, well, maybe, you know, this wasn't such a good idea. Typical politician there. Now, apparently, over 1 million Catalans mark National Day by having a pro-independence march in Barcelona. The regional independence referendum is just a few weeks away. And 1 million Catalans staged a massive rally in Barcelona to support the independence vote from Madrid. And so apparently the movement for independence there is very, very, very strong. And I remember years ago when I was still working in film work, I had a very good friend who was from Catalan. And even back then, they were talking about, you know, freedom, breaking away from Spain. Catalan is a very productive area, and they feel that they carry unjustly a lot of the economic burden for all of Spain, which obviously is why Spain does not want them to go. Now, getting into the world of political correctness, Duke University is now seeking applicants for its Men's Project. This is going to be a 9-week program that helps men examine how their masculinity exists, often in toxic ways. It sounds like brainwashing to me, you know, because if you're a man, you're going to be masculine. That's just nature. And apparently this program is now in its 2nd year, and it meets every week at the university's Women's Center. And they're being taught how to resist patriarchal oppression. Well, I've never been patriarchal, and I don't think I'm oppressing anybody, and by golly, I'm masculine. Here's a very weird story, and it's drawing a lot of criticism. Over on UC Berkeley, there's one of the campus police officers, and basically this guy went after a hot dog vendor who apparently didn't have a permit to be selling on the campus. And the police officer literally seized money from the man's wallet. Just took out his wallet and said, "This is law and order in action," and took the guy's money. And it was caught on video. And everybody's wondering, what the heck is going on here? Do campus police have civil forfeiture powers now? In any event, apparently people are raising money to cover the hot dog vendors' losses, and apparently it's already in the thousands of dollars. They're outraged by this, and they should be. If the guy's there without a permit, you issue him a citation. You don't use the civil forfeiture laws to just rob the guy. They got it on video. This police officer just robbed this guy, emptied his wallet. And then they wonder why the American people have lost all respect for police authority. Well, you have to act in a respectable manner to be respected. You go around acting like a bully, no, people may fear you, they won't respect you. Now, PETA, believe it or not, actually filed a lawsuit trying to claim that animals have a right to own property. And in this case, the animal in question was a macaque monkey named Naruto, and the property was a series of selfies that Naruto took of himself with a nature photographer's camera. Apparently, Naruto was just playing with the camera and hitting the shutter button and listening to the sound of the camera doing its thing with his face right in the lens. And so PETA wanted to basically sue to say those images, the intellectual property rights, belong to the monkey, not the photographer. Well, PETA has officially dropped the case. And so for a while, we can rest assured that the threat of animals becoming our overlords has dissipated. Sometimes PETA really discredits itself with some of the weird things they get on out and do. Now, we have been talking about America's opioid crisis, and they're now out there saying that it could kill nearly 500,000 people over the next decade. And we're not talking about the stuff that's out there on the street. We're talking about the overprescription of opioids by doctors sold by pharmacies. And they're finding out that there's a correlation between the use of these pain medications and opioid prescription rates with the declining labor force of prime age males. Apparently these guys are getting hooked on the opiates, they go on disability, they're not available for the labor force anymore. It's a huge, huge problem. But these are legal opioids, and the pharmaceutical companies are making all kinds of money about that. Now, here's a story that came on out. There's a company, Insys Therapeutics, and it is being sued in federal court. And the indictment was presented by Senator Claire McCaskill, who's a Missouri Democrat, and they have a congressional investigation going on. And basically, Insys apparently engaged in serious misconduct with their sublingual, meaning under the tongue, sprayable form of fentanyl, a drug called Subsys. Now, fentanyl is one of the strongest and most deadly opioid drugs on the market. And Subsys has only been approved for patients suffering with what the FDA calls breakthrough cancer pain. In other words, Subsys is only approved for cancer patients who are in the terminal stage and suffering tremendous, tremendous pain. Now, one of Insys's crimes they are accused of is that they were allegedly creating fake cancer patients so that they would make it look like the demand for Subsys was much higher than it actually was. And further, an employee of Subsys was caught misleading an insurance company to try and get a prescription for the potentially deadly drug for a patient who did not actually have cancer. And another part of the pharmaceutical company's ruse reportedly included having employees pretend to be staff from doctors' offices in order to trick insurance companies into approving their drugs. And according to McCaskill's report, Insys went so far as to block their outgoing phone numbers so calls couldn't be traced back to the company. If an insurer needed a phone number for a return call, company employees reportedly provided an 800 number managed by another Insys representative instead of contact information for the prescribing physician. Now, if that does not look like a deliberate plot, what will? Now, something you need to understand about all the recommendations you get from the medical industrial complex. Usually it's about pushing a product, or you're getting a warning about something that's coming from somebody who is trying to get a competing product out there in the market. And very often the information really is nonsense. I remember years ago when I still worked in advertising, I was stunned by these commercials that were on TV from a very prominent candy company saying that nutritionists had determined eating one of their candy bars was good nutrition for lunch. Because all the parts were there for a really good... That didn't last very long. So, story coming out of government slaves, the 8 worst pieces of advice medical doctors will give their patients. And the first one out here is most health problems are hereditary, and all we can do is manage them with medications. And it's a big whopping lie. There was a study that came out a week ago saying that at least 40% of all cancers are caused by environmental problems, toxic chemicals, radiation. And most health problems develop after childbirth and are a result of consuming processed chemical-laden foods and laboratory-made medicine. Of course, the next big lie, and we even heard it on the phone call, get the flu shot. And it's just all about the money. The vaccine industry has already paid out over $3 billion in settlement money to vaccine-injured families, and the majority of that money is for the flu shot. And there is little evidence that getting the flu shot will head off the flu, and a lot of evidence that getting the flu shot will give you the flu. And it's a roll of the dice anyway, because in order to get the flu vaccine ready to launch ahead of flu season, they have to start almost a year ahead in concocting it, and they sort of have to guess what strain of flu is going to be making the rounds by then. And in a couple of years, they've missed it completely. And you're out there with a flu vaccine that is completely ineffective against the flu that's actually out there in the real world. And they'll still tell you, get the shot. Couldn't wait, get the shot. We've all heard that all high cholesterol is bad. Apparently, no. It's just another device to sell you medications that have side effects. And this is another one. Chemotherapy is your best chance at beating cancer. And what's really interesting, there's a couple of statistics you need to be aware of. First of all, 25% of all cancers will spontaneously remit. They'll heal themselves. But the attitude is we don't know which 25% are going to cure themselves, so we'll just juice everybody up. Yet a survey of medical personnel, doctors and oncologists, 75% of them would not accept chemotherapy because it's ineffective and it's devastating, debilitating effects on the human body. My mother died from cancer she got from smoking, and I take that statement back. She got cancer from the smoking. I don't know that she died from it. I'm still not convinced. I mean, they hit her with the double whammy, heavy chemotherapy and radiation therapy, and she just withered away. And to this day, I have not settled in my own mind. Did she actually die of that cancer? Or did, in point of fact, the chemotherapy and the radiation kill her? That was a terrible, terrible thing to have to watch here. Another big whopper from the medical establishment. There's no need to test your blood for heavy metal toxins. Those aren't the toxins you're looking for. Move along. You probably heard the one about taking aspirin daily to prevent heart attacks. Apparently, that's really not good advice, because apparently taking aspirin every single day causes thousands of deaths every year from internal bleeding. Another whopper the medical industry will tell you is avoid organic food, or it's really all the same quality as conventional food. You don't need to pay those high prices. But again, the fewer chemicals, pesticides, heavy metal toxins you consume, the healthier you're going to be. But again, if you're healthy, then you are not a profit center for that medical industrial complex. We're going to take a break for some commercials here. Back with more bad medical advice you've probably heard from your doctor after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going down the list of bad advice given to people by their doctors. And, of course, the big whopper of all is the claim that all vaccines are safe and effective. And no vaccine in the history of vaccines has ever been proven completely safe or effective. To the contrary, many contain known carcinogens, heavy metal toxins. They contain adjuvants like peanut oil, which I think is pretty much the explanation for this epidemic of peanut anaphylaxis across our society. And nobody has addressed the issue of the nagalase that is showing up in certain vaccines. There is no legitimate reason for that to be there. And once it gets into your body, it destroys your body's ability to fight off cancer. Have we really reached the cynical state where our doctors are actually causing diseases to maximize their profits? Now then, as you know, we've talked a little bit about the so-called Church of Scientology. And as you know, Lee Remini, who was a Scientologist for a lot of years, and she had a very public break, and she has been doing this A&E docuseries, Scientology in the Aftermath. And apparently they just won the Emmy for Outstanding Informational Series. So way to go, Lee. And yes, that is a show that we capture on the DVR and watch. Those are scary people. The fanatics here. All right, let's get on back to computers and computer issues. And people are still trying to evaluate just how bad the Equifax breach has been. Now, apparently, Equifax has received a ransom demand. All of this information about all your private credit information has not yet been released on the dark web, but will be if Equifax fails to come up with the ransom payment. And it is getting to be a problem just how regularly this is happening. And what we're seeing today is entire databases. The hacks and breaches, they're hitting banking, credit card companies, government databases, voting machines, public utility infrastructure. You know, unless the government decides to reissue everyone a new Social Security number, once it's stolen, it's permanently vulnerable to exploitation. The entire system is breaking down. It is not secure. And nobody seems all that concerned about it. Hey, it's just another opportunity to sell security software. And we can all take responsibility for our privacy and security on our own computers, ignoring all the back doors the NSA and CIA have planted in them. But when your data is out on somebody else's mainframe, and they're being reckless about security or cheap, which appears to have been the case with Equifax, you're wide open and helpless. It's one of the reasons why Claire and I don't like to use plastic. You know, we're trying to live a card-free life. We don't even have the discount cards at the local supermarkets. We don't want that data out there to be put to nefarious purposes. Now, as you know, there's already a class action lawsuit against Equifax, but apparently Chatbot has added a new feature to allow you to sue Equifax in small claims court. Now, the maximum that you can sue in small claims court varies from state to state. Rhode Island, it's $2,500. Kentucky, $25,000. I'm sorry, Kentucky is $2,500. $25,000 in Tennessee. So if you're in one of those states where you've got a high limit like $25,000, this chatbot is going to allow you to sue Equifax in small claims court, and you don't need a lawyer. That's what small claims court is all about. You don't need a lawyer. You don't need to spend the money on a lawyer. You go in, you make your case. The judge either agrees with you or doesn't. So you get to play Boston Legal, for a day or whatever. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And earlier in the program, I mentioned Bernie Sanders was co-sponsoring a bill for truly universal health care, single payer in this country. And apparently Nancy Pelosi is refusing to co-sponsor it, which raises the question just how much of her investment portfolio is tied up in stocks from those companies that are benefiting from Obamacare. Another story that just came on out here, you probably heard last week, this came out of the New York Times, came out with this story that Russia was behind social media criticism of Hillary Clinton. And they came on out and said they had $100,000 and they were using fake identities and they were just all over social media. It turns out the story has absolutely no backing. And apparently this reporter, Scott Shane, discovered that there were some fake identities out there on the internet. No news there. If you actually know the internet, you know a lot of people use fake identities. And he didn't connect any of them to Russia. He just said it has to be the Russian government. And he launched this, and it led to a front page story on the New York Times, followed the day after by a Times editorial saying, oh, those gosh darn Russians, they were just out for Hillary Clinton. And it's all fallen apart. It is completely blown apart. It's another nothing burger. And they're not giving up. I guess their motto is, if at first you don't succeed, lie again. Now, all of us are concerned about our privacy. We're concerned about this surveillance state that we're living in. We're concerned about this out-of-control cybercrime epidemic that nobody seems all that concerned about. And now the spying is going private because there is a new private company, Babel X, and they will, in exchange for a subscription, allow you to basically surveil people online. And they are selling to law enforcement and government agencies and who knows who else. And apparently this system trawls through some 40 online sources, scooping up data from popular sites like Instagram, as well as inside dark web forums where the cyber criminals lurk. And guess who the subscription service's first customer was? The Pentagon. And apparently it is pricey. It is $20,000 a year to use the service. But if you have nefarious goals in mind, it's just a cost of doing business. Earlier today, Google Drive services were down in parts of the U.S. Google confirmed the outage, said they resolved the issue, but over and down detector people are still complaining they're still not able to connect. And this is why I like keeping my data here at home and not on someone else's server in the cloud. Because it's not a reliable, resilient system. In fact, it seems that as time goes on, the overall quality of internet service, computer software, hardware, is actually in decline. We've allowed it to become so bloated, we can't manage it anymore. And again, I'll give you an example on this Skype update. That Skype said, you will install this update or you will not be allowed to sign onto your account anymore. So I installed the update. It's got problems. All kinds of problems. But it's the latest and greatest. And apparently Skype just wanted to change their servers or make things... I got to tell you, the sound quality is a lot worse with this one. So I think they've tried to reduce bandwidth and just value engineer the whole thing. Apparently, there are security vulnerabilities in Bluetooth devices. And apparently there are 8 separate flaws known collectively as Blueborn. And this is coming from researchers at the security firm Armis. And they affect the devices with the Bluetooth short-range wireless protocol. And basically saying that a single infected device moving through a busy office, past dozens of people with phones, tablets, or computers with Bluetooth switched on, can basically cause rapid infection across the networks, leading to network infiltration, ransomware attacks, or data theft. Good reason to keep your Bluetooth off, unless you're actually using it, which I tend not to. Another area where people tend not to really think too much about it is your hotel Wi-Fi connection. And basically, what cybercriminals are doing is they're setting up, they'll go into a hotel room and they'll set up their own Wi-Fi hotpoint that is disguised to look like it's a hotel Wi-Fi. And people will be in the adjoining rooms and they'll flip open their Wi-Fi device and they'll see what looks like the hotel's Wi-Fi. And they tap into it and they're wide open to the hackers. Now, the way I deal with that is I have a specific machine set aside for when I travel. And I've been doing this ever since the TSA dropped and wrecked a very expensive laptop up in Seattle. I have this little tiny XP netbook. It's kind of cute. And the only thing that's on there is Outlook email and a web browser. And there's nothing else on there. No passwords, no codes, no nothing. That's just basically it. And that's what I travel with. So, you know, they can't get anything off of it. And I know not everybody is able to have multiple machines. But if you're getting a new laptop or a new tablet, you might think about keeping that old one and just emptying it out, stripping it down, and saying, that's my travel machine. When I'm out of my secure local area network, that is the machine I'm going to use. I mean, I'd love to travel with a more powerful machine. But this is safe. This is safe. There's nothing on this machine that can be stolen that represents a threat to me. And that makes it definitely worth it. Now, we've been talking a lot about Silicon Valley, and a lot of it is the history is being dramatized by Halt and Catch Fire. But lately, the return on R&D has been starting to slow down. Now, in tech circles, there's something called Moore's Law, which says transistor density doubles every 2 years or so. And that's starting to slow down. And what's going on is they're running out of ideas. They've maxed out the technology. They've taken it to a mature location. There's nothing really new or innovative on the horizon. Everything is just a recapitulation, a redesign of what went on before. And apparently Apple's getting ready to debut their new iPhone. I think they're calling it the iPhone X. It's the most expensive iPhone ever. Boy, am I glad we got onto the iPhone 7 while we had the chance to do that. But yeah, all the really good ideas, hot ideas, have already been thought of. And maybe that's why so many people who've got the technical skills are turning to cybercrime, because they can't make money any other way. Now, as you know, a short while ago, Facebook got caught in a huge scandal claiming that they were reaching 41 million Americans between the ages of 18 and 24. And that is a bit of a problem because there are only 31 million Americans between the ages of 18 and 24, which means even if Facebook is reaching every single American in that age bracket, they're still 10 million short. In other words, they were inflating their audience to inflate their ad rates. They're lying. And yet they're continuing to be the self-proclaimed arbiter of what is fake news and not fake news. So how do you trust a company that is lying to its own investors, lying to its own customers, lying to its advertisers, when they come on out and say, we'll decide for you what is true news and what is fake news? And the answer is you can't, really. And I'm finding myself in agreement with some of these other people who are saying it's time to use the antitrust laws to break some of these companies up. Facebook, Google, YouTube, and create a little competition out there. Because competition is always good for the ordinary people. That's why we had the antitrust laws back at a time when the whole point of the economy and the nation was to serve the American people. See, when you have competition, the companies have to work harder to please you and keep their prices down. When you get a system where a particular area of activity is being monopolized, then they can charge whatever they want for it. They can have shoddy services, shoddy technology, and of course the top executives are raking in the dough like crazy. And that's good for them, but not so good for those of us out here. The first thing we got to do is we have to repeal that civil litigation indemnification that computers were given all the way back in the 1970s when they were just starting out. And they were a brand new fledgling industry, and everybody saw the potential that was going to be out there. And they said, we got to have protection against, product liability. Or we could die before we really get going. And back then it made sense. But now computers and software are a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that indemnification for product liability is still on the books. And that is what has led to extreme carelessness in software, because these companies know you can't sue them. When you read that end-user license agreement, and yes, at some point you probably ought to wade through all that verbiage, they're basically immune. And that is a very dangerous situation. If you have a business and you buy a van for your business, and because of a design defect it crashes and you suffer financial harm, you can sue the manufacturer of the van. If you buy a computerized accounting system for your company, and because of a design flaw it crashes, loses all your data, and you suffer financial harm, you cannot sue the computer maker or the software maker. And every time you protect an industry like that, quality is going to go down, cost is going to go up. And that's fascism. Now, apparently over in India, there's still a big hue and cry regarding genetically modified mustard, which is going to be India's first commercially cultivated GM food crop. And there are, of course, lawsuits being brought against it from farmers, especially those who were harmed by the BT cotton debacle, those who didn't commit suicide. But apparently this is going. In fact, it's going to be on the 15th at the Supreme Court of India, whether or not they're going to be able to go ahead with this product. And, of course, if they get to go ahead to go with this product, there are various other genetically modified food crops already in the pipeline. Now, what's going on here is we're not seeing a situation where farmers and consumers are allowed to decide whether they're going to have genetically modified food or not. It is being forced on us. And I think ultimately the genetic company's goal is to have a monopolistic lock on food production all over the globe. By forcing their seeds onto farmers, even when it causes disasters. Because once you have got that pollen on your ground, you can either burn it, which is what Hungary did when they got rid of GM crops, or you can let the field lie fallow for 3 years, and most farmers don't have the economic latitude to do that. So once there is GM on your farm, basically you've got a strong incentive to just continue with it. And I think what these genetic companies want to see is a world where all the natural plant seeds have gone extinct or are simply considered unfashionable. And therefore, anybody who wants to grow food has to buy their seeds year after year after year after year from these companies, rather than the traditional style of farming, which is you save your seeds from autumn through to spring. That's how we farmed when I was a kid. But if you're saving your own seeds and growing your own food, well, then corporations can't make money off of you. And if corporations can't make money off of you, what good are you, really? Why should we even let you go on living if you're not a profit center for the corporations? And, of course, my concern is that genetic engineering is a very dangerous technology. There have already been serious mistakes made. And they just rush this stuff out there as fast as they can. It's more dangerous even than nuclear technology. When you have a 3 Mile Island or a Chernobyl or a Fukushima, yeah, you've got a radioactive hotspot, but it pretty much, you cover it over and you wait for it to die down. You put out a defective gene and it gets into the wild. You've got serious, serious problems. And again, I'm talking about the epicite gene. If that one has broken into the wild, it's only a matter of time before it will affect all corn crops. And then we're looking at a potential extinction level event. And that would just be a really, really bad thing to have happen. Anyway, getting on back here to a little bit of science. As you know, there's a big solar storm going on. And just getting hit with all these X-class flares. It's causing all kinds of problems. They're even starting to warn pregnant women about flying on passenger jetliners, because during these flares, you're actually exposed to more radiation at that 30,000-foot flight altitude. Most times they don't mention it, but you are a little more exposed to the radiation coming from space up there at 30,000 feet. In this case, it's much more intense because of the disruption of Earth's magnetic field, which normally sends most of that radiation to the polar regions where they appear as the aurora. So, boy, what a September. Look at all the disasters we're getting. Major earthquake off of Mexico, major storms in the Atlantic, major fires on the West Coast. Wow. And now we have all the solar flares. All we need right now is a giant asteroid to hit, just to round it all out. Houston's dealing with huge numbers of mosquitoes, and they're still trying to track down and clean up all the mess that washed out of the toxic dump sites by the floodwaters of Harvey. We're going to take a quick break for commercials, back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And one of our members just posted this article from Natural News over at What Really Happened. And it's depicting a typical case with the vaccines. Apparently there was this 68-year-old British grandmother named Eleanor Carruthers, and she died from the swine flu after getting the swine flu vaccine. And the doctor assured her it would offer her absolute protection from the flu. And obviously that didn't work. Either it simply didn't work or it gave her the flu. And the article basically comes on down and says that you're being lied to about the flu vaccine. Flu vaccines are not 100% effective at protecting people from the flu. They're not even 50% effective. In fact, a critical analysis of the available data reveals the flu vaccine's effectiveness rate is in the single digits. So, apparently, flu shot, they're back to this Guillain-Barré syndrome starting to show up again. They just don't care. It's not about health. Now then, this Friday, after 13 years of zooming in and around Saturn and its moons and its rings, NASA's Cassini spacecraft is going to plunge into Saturn's atmosphere, where it will burn up. They're obviously going to be trying to get as much data out of it before that catastrophic failure. But it has been an amazing journey. And just, again, 13 years of all these images. And, of course, we all remember the Huygens probe. Even though one of its 2 data channels didn't work, we still got enough data from Saturn's moon Titan to suggest that there are liquid methane seas, methane rain, and a dynamic weather system on that moon. It's the only moon in the entire solar system that has a visible atmosphere. And I think if we're really curious about finding extraterrestrial life, we should be going there. The focus is always on going someplace where we're going to find life that's kind of like what we've got here, which would be interesting. It's kind of a little late for Mars because a lot of things have ridden to Mars from Earth ever since the days of Viking. Now they want to dig through the ice on Europa and send a robot down to look for fish down there, which is a very interesting technical challenge. But we already know we can get to Titan. And if I were head of NASA, in addition to ordering our ground crews to dress up like apes every time an astronaut returned to Earth, I would be seriously considering a life sciences mission to Titan. Because if you find something in those methane seas, you're going to know it didn't come from Earth. It is truly of unearthly origin. And that would be a socially transformative event. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller's program. He's got lots and lots of good stuff to share with you. Please share what you learn here with everybody that you know. And we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.